Hey everyone, it's Ian here. I know I've been talking a lot about politics and history lately, kind of dry stuff. And so today I figured I would, moisten the mood a little bit and talk about one of my personal obsessions, which is Mariah Carey. And just so you know, before I get started, there are going to be two different sections to this video. The first is going to be a quick, as quick as possible, run through of her career, just to give some context to what I'm going to talk about later. And then in the second part, there will be some actual discussion and analysis, and I'll even do some singing at some point. And so I do understand that for the non-fans, the first half is probably going to be the less interesting half. Hopefully not boring, but less interesting. But so just hang in there. I promise the second half of the video will be more juicy. But so anyway, let's just get started. Mariah Carey released her debut album in 1990 at the age of 20. And she wrote every song on the album, and it was a massive success. It made her become an instant superstar. She got 4 #1 singles. It sold like 15 million copies worldwide, and she won 2 Grammy Awards from it. And so the next year, in 1991, she released her second album. It's called Emotions. And in addition to writing all the songs on this album, she also produced all the songs on this album because she had been unhappy with a lot of the production elements of her first album. But the sales of this album, of Emotions, were kind of underwhelming compared to the first one. And so the head of her record label, Tommy Mottola, the head of Sony Records, he took her under his wing. And in 1993, she released her third album. It's called Music Box, and this actually became the best-selling album of her career. A couple of her songs, Hero and Without You, those are 2 of her biggest worldwide hits. Those are on this album. But the thing is, this album is full of very like schmaltzy, gooey pop ballads, like Hero and Without You. And I think it's what a lot of people would expect of a Mariah Carey album, and it is her best-selling album, so that does make sense. But I actually don't listen to this one very much. Personally, I find it to be a very bland listening experience. But one thing about this album, though, is that her first 2 albums, they made a very concerted effort to show off the highs and lows of her voice, because she has a 5-octave vocal range, and for those of you who are not musically inclined, an octave, you can think of it as like 8 keys on a piano. An octopus has 8 tentacles, and an octagon has 8 sides. An octave is 8 notes, and so she has a 5-octave vocal range. She can hit 40 keys on a piano, which is crazy. Most people, the vast majority of people, cannot do that. But the thing about this album, the 93 album, Music Box, she reined in a lot of her vocals. The vocal acrobatics. She didn't do as many of the crazy high notes, the whistle notes, or as many of the low notes. But personally, I would actually consider, and this is, again, personally, I would consider 1993 to 95 to be her vocal peak, in my opinion. I think she got over a lot of stage fright that she might have been feeling, and she just kind of perfected the delivery of some of her songs, including her earlier song. But the tone of her voice was also just very silky and smooth, and almost buttery. And she could still definitely sing after this, but it was just that as the 90s wore on, her voice just got a little raspier, and not bad raspy. I love the rainbow tone, just for the lambs. But it was just, I do consider her vocal peak to be 93 to 95. But also in the year 1993, when she released this album, she also married the head of her record label, Tommy Mottola. And since he was her husband and her record label president, and 20 years older than her, he controlled her career and public image and personal life very carefully and very strictly until they divorced in 1997. He forced her to dress very conservatively. When she was like 23 years old, he made her dress like she was like 45 years old. And he told her how to behave publicly. She didn't really get to have much fun. And he actually didn't even let her leave the house, except for interviews and public performances. But then she just had to come straight home. And since he was the head of her label, he got to decide what music she was and wasn't allowed to record and release. And Tommy and the label as a whole, they actually also made an effort to somewhat conceal her biracial heritage on her album covers and stuff, and in photo shoots, because her mom is white, but her dad is black and Venezuelan. And so she is mixed race, and that's never been something that she has kept secret. That's she's actually discussed that since the early days of her career. But her label wanted, and specifically Tommy, wanted to keep that as ambiguous as possible. And they did all of these things because he did all of these things, excuse me, because she had been marketed as a singer of big, Celine Dion type ballads, and they wanted her to appeal to a white adult audience, and so she was very restrained personally and creatively. But so the next year, in 1994, she released her Christmas album, which I'll talk about that in the second part of this video, which I promise is coming. So the next year, in 1995, she released an album called Daydream. And this is actually my favorite album of hers. And it was her fifth album in 6 years. I mean, in the early years of her career, it was one after another after another. And this became the second best-selling album of her career. I talked about how I personally view 93 to 95 to be her vocal peak. Objectively, it was also her commercial peak. This was when her two best-selling albums came out. But the thing about Daydream, the 95 album, is that this began a transformation for her musically. First of all, her writing began to improve a lot with this album. And she never was a bad writer, but with this album, it became a lot more mature, a lot more thoughtful, and I think a lot more personal rather than based on kind of love song cliches, maybe. But more importantly, with this album, with Daydream, she began making a transition from pop music to R&B and hip hop, aka from a white sound to a black sound. And this made her label really nervous because, again, she had been marketed as a singer of big white pop ballads, and they wanted her to appeal to white audiences with that type of song, not with songs that had, heavy bass and guest rappers. And on the topic of guest rappers, actually, the remix to her song Fantasy, which came out in 1995, and that's one of her bigger hits. But the remix to that song was actually the first song by a pop artist to feature a guest rapper verse. And that's very commonplace now. That sounds it's weird to think about that used to not be a thing, but that wasn't a thing until she did it in 1995. So Mariah Carey was very much ahead of her time. But so in 1997, she released an album called Butterfly, and this is actually her favorite album of hers. And this album, it completed the personal and the career metamorphosis that had begun in 1995 with Daydream. She divorced her controlling label head, and she became a fully fledged R&B hip hop artist. And in addition to this, her writing continued to get a lot better. I talked about 93 to 95 vocal peak. I also personally view 95 to 97 to be her lyrical peak. Her lyrics were becoming a lot more mature, a lot more thoughtful and personal, like I said, and also at times they were getting more sexual. There's a song of hers called Honey, which it's one of her number ones, and it's one of her first hip hop songs. But this song, Honey, is totally 100% about cum. If you read the lyrics, it is about cum. But I think that this album is when she really perfected her craft as an artist. But because of this change in sound, this move towards R&B and hip hop, her sales took a hit. And she was also still very creatively restrained by her label. Some of her best songs were actually on this album, Butterfly, the 97 album. But she wasn't allowed to release them commercially as singles because they were too R&B and they were too hip hop. But so she definitely went through a musical evolution from 93 to 97 with Music Box Daydream Butterfly. And I'll talk more about this evolution in the second part of the video, which again, I promise is coming. In 1999, she released an album called Rainbow, which I'm not going to talk about just in the interest of time, but it was the final album on her original recording contract, and so she rushed through this album, understandably so, to get away from her, controlling ex-husband. But so when she finished this original contract with Sony Records, she got offered a $100 million, which was a record-breaking record deal, a $100 million record deal from Virgin Records, and the first album on this new contract was the soundtrack to the 2001 film Glitter, which to call Glitter a low point in her career is just a vast understatement. I mean, her career cratered with this movie and soundtrack. I obviously love Mariah Carey, in case that's somehow not clear yet. But Glitter is a very bad movie. It is not good. And I think the soundtrack is fine. It's far from her best work, but I think it gets lumped in with the movie because the movie is so famously awful. Um, but the thing is, the movie was not only plagued by low quality, and by the soundtrack being released on literal 9/11, but she also had a very public breakdown, a meltdown in the lead up to the release of this, and she actually had to be hospitalized for the reason given at the time was extreme exhaustion. She had been overworked. That's what the claim was at the time. If you were alive and paying attention in 2001, you probably remember Glitter and the surrounding mess. Oh my gosh, just knocked my phone is my light, one of my lights. I have a very delicate lighting setup. But anyway, the debacle was actually, it was so large that her label actually bought her out of her contract. This brand new $100 million record contract. They actually paid her even more money to stop making albums under their label name because of Glitter was such a mess. But so she found a new label, thankfully, and in 2003 she released an album called Charm Bracelet, and this very much underperformed commercially. And in addition to that, critics gave it pretty mixed reviews. They actually said that her voice sounded like it was in bad shape. They said it sounded airy and weak and dry, and it just didn't have that same smoothness, that silkiness that I talked about from like 1993. And so at this point, her career was just considered over. But so then in 2005, the next album that she released was called The Emancipation of Mimi. And this was very much her comeback album. It was a huge success. It was her first number one album since 1997 with Butterfly. And it contained what was metrically and not like the metric system, but by the way that the Billboard charts measure song success. It contained the biggest song of her entire career. That was her comeback song. It's called We Belong Together. And it's actually the biggest song of the entire 2000s decade by any artist, again, according to Billboard. And it was so big that it blocked another song of hers called Shake It Off from hitting number one. Shake It Off peaked at number 2 behind We Belong Together. And so this album and the song We Belong Together, they showed that she was still a major figure in the recording industry. She was still a force to be reckoned with. It had big vocals, solid production, multiple top 10 songs, and it was the best-selling album of 2005, and it won her 3 Grammy Awards. And remember that just a couple years before, just with her previous album, her career had been deemed over. She was deemed a has-been. And so this was very much her comeback album. In 2008, she released an album called E=MC². It was the follow-up to Emancipation, and I don't have time to talk about this album, which is a shame because I actually do like this album. So all I'll say about it is that it has very good production. She put a lot of effort into the details of the production. But so the next year in 2009, she released an album called Memoirs of an Imperfect Angel. And once again, I'm going to skip this album just in the interest of time. And so I apologize to the 3 memoir stands that exist out there. And in 2010, she released her second Christmas album. It's called Merry Christmas to You. And I'm also not going to discuss this just in the interest of time. I do know that people aren't as interested in Mariah Carey as me. But so after this, after 2010, she took several years off before she released another album. And the next one she released came out in 2014. And it has, oh my gosh, just the most Mariah Carey name I think of anything that has ever been released and ever will be released. It's called Me, I Am Mariah, The Elusive Chanteuse. I don't think I need to tell you that that's a very cluttered title. And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. You know, I think if it was called Me, I Am Mariah, it'd be like, oh, just Mariah Carey. And if it was called The Elusive Chanteuse, Chanteuse is French for female singer. If it was called The Elusive Chanteuse, it'd be like, okay, that's, just Mariah being Mariah. But, it's not either of those things. It's both of those things. And so, again, it's just very cluttered. And similarly, it's also a very cluttered album. It's 18 songs long. It's almost an hour and a half. And none of the songs are necessarily bad. I actually like that album. But it's just very cluttered. There's a lot going on. A lot of the songs have punctuation in the title and just lots of just a lot going on. But so after this album, in 2014, she took another 4 years off before she released another album. And in 2018, she released an album called Caution. This was her most recent studio album. And I like this album a lot. It's actually one of her best albums, and I'm not just saying that as a fan, I promise. But I in addition to liking this album, I respect this album, and I respect her for releasing this album. And the reason for that is because she reined herself in a lot. She cut out all the clutter. I think she learned her lesson from Me, I Am Mariah, the Elusive Chanteuse. She went from having 18 songs to 10 songs. She went from 80 minutes to 39 minutes, and she went from, Me, I Am Mariah, the Elusive Chanteuse to Caution. And she also totally changed her sound. She did a complete 180, and she produces all her music, but she worked with a bunch of modern big name producers who work with big name artists, like Drake and Ariana Grande and stuff. And so the result of this change in sound and the reining herself in, this resulted in her releasing the most critically acclaimed album of her entire career. And feel free to check Metacritic to see if that's true. But also around the time that this album was being released, she also came forward and announced that in 2001, when she had been hospitalized during the glitter clusterfuck, she had actually been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. It wasn't just extreme exhaustion. But she couldn't come forward with this at the time because this would have ruined her career. She had had several years of declining sales and then released this awful movie that, cratered her career, and then released an album where critics accused her of not being able to sing anymore. And then she had said, oh, by the way, 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. That would have just been the end of Mariah Carey. And I was not paying attention in 2001. But if you go back and watch some of her public appearances from that summer, which I do not expect you to do, but if you do go back and watch them, it's very clear that she is unwell. And so I imagine this must have been a huge weight off her shoulders. It's kind of like if you've been dating a girl for 5 or 6 years and finally come out as gay, you probably breathe, a big sigh of relief. And I imagine this is how she felt. But so anyway, that ends after, oh my gosh, 17 minutes. I'm so sorry. But that ends the boring part of this video. I hope you guys stuck around for the juicier part. I think it's pretty clear just based on the first half of this video, and the fact that I've mentioned it several times, but I'm obsessed with Mariah Carey. And so at this point, you might be wondering why exactly that is. And I too have asked myself that same question. I've wondered that before, even before I started making this video. And so I've actually put a good amount of thought into answering that. And so after much deliberation, the answer is as follows. Honestly, the short version of it is just that I find her songs very stimulating. She has great vocals, but it's more than just the vocals. It's also the music behind it. She's a very good producer, but it's more than just the vocals and the music that backs it up. It's also the words that she's singing. She's a really, really good writer, and so she just checks all these boxes. And not only does her music check all these boxes, she's the one that checks it. She checks them all herself and does it all very well. She's really, really involved in every detail of every song on her album. And so the thing is, she's not just vocally gifted. She's very musically gifted. She's truly artistically gifted. She's very good at her job, which is making music. But so simply put, I have no choice but to stan. But there's a very specific section of her career, though, that I want to look at. It's from 1993 to 97. And her singing, production, and writing all went through an evolution during this period, and it's actually the exact same time frame as when she was married to Tommy Mottola, the controlling record label head. But so I'm going to sing excerpts from 3 songs of hers from 3 consecutive albums to try and highlight these evolutions. The first one I'll sing is the bridge and final chorus of a song called All I've Ever Wanted. And this is from Music Box, the 93 album. That's her best-selling album. Just a second, though, I'm going to take a drink of tea. It has some honey in it. Talking is actually strenuous on your vocal cords. Everything I do is for you, and you are every part of me, and I don't want to face another day alone without your love, 'cause all I've ever wanted is you and your love, and I love you so, more than you could ever know. All I ever wanted is you. I definitely utilized the diva, finger wave a lot. But so anyway, I think this is probably what the average person would expect of a Mariah Carey song, which is not surprising considering that this is from her best-selling album. But it's very schmaltzy, it's very sappy, and it's full of the big vocal moments, the runs and whatnot. And it's very, if you listen to the song, it's very white pop music. But so this thing is, even though this is from her best-selling album, this is also Mariah at her most manufactured, at her least authentic self. And so that's why I like I said earlier in this video, way back when this started, eons ago. Sorry, it's a very bland listening experience. But so next I'm going to sing the final verse of a song of hers called I Am Free. And this is from my favorite album of hers, the 1995 album Daydream. Just going to have another drink of tea, though. Just to soothe the vocal cords. Once I was so alone, unsteady and cold, but your love rained down upon me, washing away uncertainty, yeah. And now I am free. So that song I think it's very similar vocally, to that first song. It has, the runs and the big vocal moments, like I said. But I think it shows a lyrical evolution on her part. Saying that, once I was so alone, unsteady and cold, but your love rained down upon me, washing away uncertainty, and now I am free. That's a step up from and I'm really like numerous steps up from I don't want to face another day alone without your love, 'cause all I've ever wanted is you and your love. I think it shows a maturity and a growth to her writing. And like I said earlier, once again, eons ago, it starts to become more personal and less reliant on love song cliches. But also, if you listen to this song, which I'm not expecting you to do, but if you do listen to this song, the production of it is a lot more R&B. It's a lot blacker. She's moving away from the gooey pop ballads that defined her, the early part of her career, and I think still define her career, even though she has moved on from that sound, 25 years ago. And just kind of a word to the wise before I keep going. If you're ever on like American Idol, actually, I don't know if American Idol's still on. I remember it came back. I don't know what happened with that. But if you're ever on, the singing competition shows, don't sing Mariah Carey songs. It's not just because of the crazy high notes, like the. I think she could sing higher than I can actually whistle. But she has very strong vocal cords. The voice is a muscle, and her throat muscles are very, very strong. She can hit like 10 notes in 2 seconds, and she can sing for a really long time without taking a breath. She writes all her songs, and since she has this crazy voice that no one else has, she writes songs that no one else can sing. But so anyway, just in the interest of moving on from this segment, preserving my voice, I'm going to move on to the third and final song, and this is from the 1997 album Butterfly, and it's called "The Roof." And I'm going to sing the first verse and first chorus of this song, and it's a very wordy song, so I'm going to let you know when I get to the chorus. It wasn't raining yet, but it was definitely a little misty on that warm November night. And my heart was pounding, my inner voice resounding, begging me to turn away, but I just had to see your face to feel alive. And then you casually walked in the room, and I was twisted in the web of my desire for you. My apprehension blew away, I only wanted you to taste my sadness as you kissed me in the dark. And now the chorus starts. Every time I feel the need, I envision you caressing me and go back in time to relive the splendor of you and I on the rooftop that rainy night. So I don't think I need to explain how that song differs lyrically or vocally from those first two songs. But I will for the next 39 minutes. See, it all goes back to 1310 when Mariah Carey's great. I'm just kidding. One difference I will explain though is that these first two songs, those were never meant to be released as singles. They're album cuts. They're both in the latter half of their respective albums. But The Roof, however, the third song, that was intended by Mariah herself to be a single. She wanted that to be her sound. And that's actually one of her all-time favorite songs that she's ever written. But her label, specifically Tommy, did not let her release it because she had been marketed as a singer of those first two songs, particularly the first song. And there's a similar story for numerous songs on the Butterfly album, the 97 album, as well as Daydream, the 95 album, including my favorite song of all time by any artist. It's called Underneath the Stars, and it's just a very pretty song. It's very chill for a Mariah Carey song. I don't think it's what people would expect of a Mariah song, and it just makes me want to lie down in the grass underneath the stars. But it really it shows off her writing and her production skills really well, but it doesn't have the big vocal moments like those first two songs do. And it's also a very R&B song, and so it wasn't allowed to be released, which is sad because I said it's my favorite song ever. It's also one of her favorite songs, but so it's just very poetically written and very softly sung and very R&B-ly produced. That's a word now, I guess. But keep in mind though that this was the 1990s. This was long before streaming and any kind of digital downloads like iTunes. I don't think the iTunes store came along for another 5 or 6 years after this. But so the only way for songs to gain traction with audiences at this point in time was for them to be specifically chosen to be released as singles and sold in CD format for people to physically go buy at the store. And the mid to late 90s, this was her artistic peak. This was when she was really coming into her like I said, her peak as an artist, creatively and musically. And I can't imagine how frustrating it must be to repeatedly have your best and most personally meaningful work, really art, not just work, stifled like that. I just kind of, by the way, I talked about how I personally view 93 to 95 as the vocal peak and personally view 95 to 97 as the lyrical peak. That's why I like Daydream, the 95 album, so much, is because it hits this sweet spot of overlapping, vocal and lyrical peaks. And it's also a sweet spot between the pop, the gooey, bland pop of 93 and the much more stimulating R&B and hip-hop music of 97. But so in case you haven't noticed, one of the points that I've really been trying to hammer down hard on, though, is, oh my gosh, hard on, Sorry, it's late, and that's just where my mind goes apparently. But one of the points I'm really trying to hammer down on is that she's a writer, and honestly, first and foremost, she is a writer before she's even a singer. She started writing poems when she was like 5 or 6 years old, and she started writing songs when she was 11. And by the time she was 15, she had a demo tape of songs that she had written and sung and produced by herself. And most of those ended up on her debut album, which was released when she was 19 or 20. Sources differ, according to Wikipedia, which I just think is hilarious. But the lack of recognition for her songwriting is actually something that's always really bothered her as an artist. I realize I can't see any of you who might be watching this video, but do me a favor and just raise your hand if you were surprised to learn that Mariah Carey writes all of her music and always has. My guess is that a lot of you probably raise your hands just because she has been marketed as a singer, and she was a big name around the time of Whitney Houston and like Celine Dion, who were singers who did not write or produce their music, and so I think she just got lumped in with them. But so, like I said, my guess is that probably a lot of you have your hands raised. And so just know that if your hand is raised, you are a fugly slut. No, don't worry. But the thing is, I don't just like her because she's a writer. I respect anyone who writes their own songs because that's very hard to do. You know, Whitney Houston didn't write her own songs, and that's fine because that's hard to do. Not everyone has that to their credit. But the reason I like Mariah so much is because she's so good at it. You know, my goal here in LA is to be a writer, a screenwriter, so different, but still a writer nonetheless. And so good quality writing really appeals to me. And Mariah Carey has a very extensive vocabulary. She's very emotionally articulate. I think the emotion of a Whitney Houston song is in her vocals. The power and the immediate impressiveness of her voice. I think her voice was more immediately impressive than Mariah Carey's. But the emotion of a Mariah Carey song to me is in the lyrics. It's in the substance, not the delivery. She uses words like disillusion and euphoric and intangible and relinquish and languish and dissipate and despondent and acquiescent and unvarnished and incessantly and unbridled and emblazoned and rhapsodized. She's a writer. And in addition to the big words, her songs also have a narrative to them. They have a structure. She tells you a story with her songs, you know, a sequence of events. She'll say, like, you know, and then you softly pressed your lips to mine, and feeling surfaced I'd suppressed for such a long, long time. And for a while I forgot the sorrow and the pain, and melted with you as we stood there in the rain. Or, I don't, you know, like, and we drifted to another place and time, and the feeling was so heady and sublime, as I lost my heart to you there in the dark, underneath the stars. She's a writer. Anyway, though, I have finally reached the end of this video. I know I had said earlier that I would talk eons ago that I would talk about her 1994 Christmas album, and really specifically the song "All I Want for Christmas Is You" in this video. But sadly, I just didn't have time to get to it because there's really a lot to talk about. I could have spent another like 15 minutes alone on that topic, and I don't want to like hold the viewers hostage. OMG. But if that is something that people are interested in hearing about, I'm more than willing to make another video later on about that. Because really, I do have, literally another 13 minutes of Christmas material in my transcript for this video that I just had to cut for time. But regardless of any of that, if you're still here, thank you very much for sticking around. I really had a great time making this. And so if you're interested, I've left 5 song recommendations of hers in the description to this that I think just do the best job of highlighting her discography. And just kind of FYI, none of these songs sound the same as the others, and they all represent different periods of her career. And I was careful to only pick from her highest quality songs, and so my hope is that this is an interesting listening experience to you. But so anyway, I hope you had a good time watching this. Thank you so much, and have a great night.